Have you ever wondered why Black people are one of the most religious people, despite the fact that religion was used as a tool to oppress us? Firstly, you need to understand that religion is psychological programming. This programming usually begins at a very young age and reduces someone's ability to think independently and critically about themselves, the world, and their views. Very much so that so many Black people have used religion to justify their own subjugation and slavery. This isn't because they are less self-aware about the pain we experience. If anything, they understand it very much that they glorify the suffering. Religion fetishizes poverty and suffering, very much so that it offers a reward for suffering in the afterlife.
God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. And I remind myself of that, like, you went through it because you could. And
the phrase, God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers, is the clutch a lot of religious people use to comfort themselves, but also to reinforce suffering. Because the more suffering they endure represents the amount of tests that God is presenting them with. So the more they endure, the more they are seen as strong. And this is also why there is a strong correlation between poverty, inequality, and religion. And this is also why people become less religious when there is safety and stability around them. Religion thrives in the community of the oppressed because it delivers hope and solutions and teaches that justice will one day be served in the afterlife, therefore keeping us in a place of ignorance and powerlessness because God will deal with it all. Ultimately, religion becomes part of someone's identity, and this controlling instrument passes down from generation to generation just to start.
System malfunction.
Have you ever wondered why Black people are one of the most religious people?
System malfunction.
YouTube, what is happening? We're gonna go ahead and spin the block with another one. Download Malfunction. You already know. This is the one-stop shop for all of the dysfunction and the madness that takes place in our society today. Nevertheless, we understand that no one's perfect over here, but you need to understand that we are here to judge. I came across this post the other day on TikTok, and it surrounds a topic that I've always been interested in and that I've always taken part in. And it's this idea of religion, especially as it relates to Black people. Honestly, this is an extremely serious topic because it's not just a theory or an ideology. Well, I guess in the bigger picture it is, but this seeps into their belief systems. And once it buries down that far, it becomes part of one's DNA. And if you've ever had a conversation with someone who is of a different faith or just any religious sect, they are staunch about how they feel about that, and there's nothing you can say or do that can sway them or change their minds. From my personal perspective, I grew up in a Baptist church where we didn't just go to school on Sundays along with Sunday school first. We went to school on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and sometimes on Friday night. And I witnessed the Holy Ghost get a hold of some of my aunties and my grandmama on a regular basis. And honestly speaking, something was always off to me about that. None of that really made sense because that same Baptist community, for the most part, lived in abject poverty. They didn't have a lot. They didn't have access to a lot of resources. But still yet, these were some of the most religious, God-fearing people I had ever seen. And to top it off, I saw how the government and a lot of the political systems continue to marginalize God's people. So I always wondered, when is God gonna come and extract his people from this hell of an environment? But something deep down inside me told me that God was never gonna come in and alleviate his people of these problems. So then at some point, I started making these internal concessions with myself. I said, well, if he's not gonna come back and help his people, then maybe he'd sit back and send a few signs so that we knew what the message was, and then we can proceed accordingly. And I would search high and low for these messages, whether it was a bird sitting on a telephone pole looking at me. I would internalize that as a potential message from God. Or sometimes I would ask God to make my mom's life much easier because he knew that she had been through way too much. I would find myself alone sometimes, pleading deep down inside for God to make things easier. And with all that want and asking, things only got worse. So there was a point where I said, this is all a sham. And as I got a little older, in my early teens, I came across a highly respected brother in the community that was part of the 5% of Nation of Islam. And because I was vigorously searching for answers and some help, I found myself at the mosque, peddling the final call and slinging bean pies. That was a period in my life where I learned a whole lot about myself, my history, and my community, which in turn changed my paradigm and how I perceive the world. I felt righteous with all of that new knowledge, but angry all at the same time. In the end, nothing really changed other than my mind space. All of the negatives that I was asking for help with from God only seemed to get worse. Crime continued to shoot up. Broken families continued to increase. The struggle continued. So again, I gave up in being extremely active in that space. And I gave up on praying for the clouds to part one day and God to extend the hand to pull me and my family up out of this hell. I say all that to say, when I came across this post, it resonated with me. It perfectly aligned with my perspective on this as I've seen it way before I was even baptized. So what I wanted to do was just listen to her post again and break down what she is explaining piece by piece so you get an understanding on how I view this.
Have you ever wondered why Black people are one of the most religious people, despite the fact that religion was used as a tool to oppress us? Firstly, you need to understand that religion is psychological programming. This programming usually begins at a very young age and reduces someone's ability to think independently and critically about themselves, the world, and their views. Very much so that so many Black people have used religion to justify their own subjugation.
To answer her question, yeah, I've always wondered that. And it's not until you come of age and you get a little bit of knowledge that you realize exactly the sinister plan behind this ideology. It is also a fact that religion was utilized in order to enslave people. It was extremely hard for them to enslave the inhabitants who were already of age and had a connection with their land, or the people who they brought over here on those slave ships who knew that they had a connection to their spiritual gods and their religious practices, because those folks already had an understanding and a connection with their deity. But it's only a matter of time until those people had offspring who could easily be manipulated as evil saw fit. If you don't know anything, or you don't have any connection to any convictions that you come from, then your mind and your thoughts are extremely pliable and ripe for the taking. If we can hold the argument that all people are people and we're all one and the same, then how is it that other peoples can have different convictions as it relates to religion? For example, if you're born in China, there's a high probability that you'll be a Buddhist. And if you're born in Iran or Saudi Arabia, then that's a higher probability that you're probably going to be a Muslim. So it's clear that what she's saying is absolutely true, because you can take those same children who were born in China or who were born in Iran and have them raised in a Christian society, and more than likely they will have deep convictions to Christianity and believe that Jesus is their savior. And to her last point, that so many Black people has used religion to justify their subjugation is true, because the way that Christianity was delivered to Black people perfectly aligns with the life of Jesus Christ, because he lived a life of subjugation, which means that they are living a life that's in alignment with his experience. So they must be on the right path.
And slavery. This isn't because they are less self-aware about the pain we experience. If anything, they understand it very much that they glorify the suffering. Religion fetishizes poverty and suffering, very much so that it offers a reward for suffering in the afterlife.
God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. And I remind myself of that, like, you went through it because you could. And
the phrase God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers is the clutch a lot of religious people use to comfort themselves, but also to reinforce suffering.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything new here. I think it pretty much aligns with my original point or original response to subjugation, and that Black people feel like the fact that Jesus' life was one of subjugation and pain and dealing with the poor and living poor, that their lives are aligned with his, so they are in the graces of God because of their experience.
Because the more suffering they endure represents the amount of tests that God is presenting them with. So the more they endure, the more they are seen as strong. And this is also why there is a strong correlation between poverty, inequality, and religion. And this is also why people become less religious when there is safety and stability around them. Religion thrives in the community of the oppressed because it delivers hope and solutions, and teaches that justice will one day be served in the afterlife. therefore keeping us in a place of ignorance and powerlessness because God will deal with it all. Ultimately, religion becomes part of someone's identity, and this controlling instrument passes down from generation to generation just to start.
Yeah, I think simply put, I agree with all of her points for the most part. I think my first and second response to this basically covered all the point that she was making, but religion does thrive in the poverty mindset, because I have friends who are extremely wealthy and you don't hear them talk about God and religion and going to church as much as you do in dealing with people in poor communities. They seem to be the ones that are always in the church multiple times a week, paying their tithes, and seemingly doing their best to live a life that follows the path of a godly one. So thank you guys all for stopping by again. I really appreciate it. Please do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell, and check out the library. And do not forget that on Wednesdays, Download Malfunction has the Wig Hat Hunting Wednesdays, where we take an interesting dive into cultural appropriation as it relates to women wearing European-style wigs, blue-green contacts, and thinking that there's someone that they're not, and sort of try and understand all this dysfunction that may be going on internally with these individuals. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this video. Check out the channel. Leave a comment on those videos if you find something interesting. And until then, this is clearly a download malfunction.
System malfunction.